Hello, everybody, and welcome to NLL Lacrosse Talk. I'm Candid Frank. He's Gary Groob, and our very special guest is Tom Ryan, former NLL player and current head coach of the St. Lawrence College Saints. First of all, Tom, welcome to the program. Thank you for taking time to join us.
Of course, good to be here.
I guess the first and most important question we like to ask at the very beginning of every one of these interviews is, how did you come to pick up a stick?
Well, I grew up playing hockey, and lacrosse started in my town. I think when I was about in fifth grade. It was either the first or second year that they offered it. A couple guys had kids that were kind of high school age, so Lou Saltrelli and Frank Shields started the program, and so it was a 6th, 7th, and 8th grade program. I was in 5th grade, and me and a buddy asked if we could play, and they said sure, and that was kind of where it got started in 5th grade. It was just something. I think the program was only like 5 or 6 weeks. We played a couple of times a week, and then we had a game or two at the end. So it was kind of more of an introduction to the sport.
What attracted you the most about the game?
Well, being a hockey player, there's some obvious crossover, but it just the ability to really do so much with the ball in your stick. I feel like there's just a lot of room for kind of individuality, more so in other sports, and it's something that you can really work on your own. And whether you're in a backyard or in your bedroom, you can kind of work on things on your own. So I think that's really what drew me to the sport early on.
Moving from a player to what you do now, what were the attractions for there? What made you want to do that?
Well, at some point along the way, lacrosse became the most important thing in my life, and I haven't really ever planned things out. I kind of go from one thing to the next, and have been presented with some amazing opportunities along the way. As I say, there's a lot more important jobs out there, but not for me.
It doesn't surprise you that other people like yourself go through the whole chain of command, if you will, from player to coach to organizer to league starter, all that kind of stuff. It's not surprising, is it, with this game?
Well, it's very easy to fall in love with it and become passionate about it, and once you feel it in your bones, you don't really have a choice. Let's look across the computer here and see some lifers, and there's just people in the sport that it's just a part of who they are, and so the thought of not doing it is not really even an option.
Okay, let's find out who you are and let Gary start.
You're talking about starting at 15, and Canton Central, right, is where you went to school and where all this happened. How did this get ready for when you actually made it towards college, where you really picked up steam, your development?
Well, for me, the turning point, I guess, was my junior year in high school. There was a couple of times when I was in high school where I was considering quitting lacrosse and focusing more on hockey. Fortunately, I wasn't that good of a hockey player, so opportunities started to present themselves in the sport of lacrosse. And so the summer of my junior year, or I guess like that late spring, I started to get some momentum being kind of third or fourth attackman on my high school team. We went to Syracuse University. The first Division I game I ever went to see was Syracuse playing UPenn in the national semifinals, and that was a game that Gary Gate stuffed 2 over the top of the net in the first ever air gate. Nice. And that was really a transformational moment for me. I mean, I was looking around at my friends, wondering if that sort of shot happened all the time at this level. But it just really, it kind of blew me away, and it really opened my mind to possibilities in the sport, and I really became obsessed from that point on.
Right. Well, you saw something that not only transformed you, but it revolutionized the game altogether, and you can actually pinpoint it to that precise moment. So that's earth-shaking. Yeah.
So that was a real transformation for me. At that point, I started to focus more on lacrosse. I went to Bowdoin College in Maine, which is a Division III school. I was recruited to a couple schools, but back then, they didn't have the clubs. There weren't really that many camps even. So I kind of just ended up at Bowdoin and walked into a program that was quite established, and I was very fortunate that we had a real strong team. We won the New England Championship my freshman year. We lost in overtime to Middlebury my junior year, and then we beat Middlebury my senior year. Back then, our league didn't allow us to participate in the NCAA tournament, so the New England Championship was all we had. And it's not often that you can end a season with a win, and I was very fortunate that was two of the times in my life I was able to end my season with a win.
Right, and you're predominantly an attacker at that point, right?
Yeah, I played attack in college, and then after college, played attack or midfield, or really whatever role the team I was playing on needed. As a box player, I started out as an offensive player, and then kind of transitioned into some kind of two-way midi. I don't know if back then they really had reverse transition players, but I'd go out the O door and then get back and play D and get off. And so I really loved being able to play both sides of the ball.
Right. You're ahead of your time, way ahead of the Cordingley experience anyways, with Buffalo and Calgary and Toronto. But you definitely left a mark there, because you set the all-time leading scorer record with 315 points there. I believe it's still a record today. And you're in the Hall of Fames for both Canton Central and for Bowdoin College. So, yeah, you've left your mark, definitely. What drew you to box? You were a field player. So
yeah.
How did box come into the equation?
Well, when I was in college, we would play in rinks in the summer in upstate New York here. And it wasn't real box. It was more field lacrosse inside. I think the goals were like 5 feet high by 4.5 feet wide, and they were field goalies. And so, I loved playing in rinks just with the ball staying in there. I thought I knew something about box lacrosse. It wasn't until I tried out for the Blazers after I graduated from college that was really my first experience with box lacrosse. That first attempt at making the Blazers, I actually got cut the first round, and then I went home that next summer, and the Iroquois Lacrosse Association was kind of getting back up and running. They didn't really play a lot of box lacrosse for the kind of during the 80s and early 90s on the Akwesasne Reservation. And it was the summer of 94 where I came home, and I had a couple of my buddies from Canton were playing on a team off the Akwesasne Reservation. And so Akwesasne had 3 teams. They had the Thunder, the Outlaws, and then the Tri-Town Warriors. This was the senior B league. Onondaga, Oneida had teams, Ganawaga, Oka. And so that was really my first experience outside of just tryouts of playing real box lacrosse. And that was an eye-opening experience for a lot of different reasons.
Absolutely. Now, I want to get back to when you first tried out for Boston. In the very first training camp, was it what you expected, or did you have any expectations of what you were going into?
Yeah, I don't think it was what I expected. I think I underestimated the level of play, and I think because I had played in rinks before, I thought I knew something about box lacrosse. But, I think I couldn't practice the first 1 or 2 tryouts because, I'd had a couple concussions, and it took me a while to get cleared. And so by the time I started tryouts, I missed a couple, and that kind of set me behind. And, I just didn't stand out enough. I was, a Division III lacrosse player, and just, didn't play well enough to make that team. And so, that was really kind of a soul searching time in my life. I just graduated from college and very passionate about lacrosse, and I had to take some time to think about it, and, just realized and decided that this was something I really wanted to do. And so I put together kind of a game plan of how to better approach it, the following year, and playing box lacrosse was part of that. And then, the opportunity kind of presented itself very fortuitously of being able to play in that Iroquois Lacrosse Association.
Right. Now, when you finally got onto the Boston team, you were on there for about 3 years. Let's talk about, because Boston was always a predominant powerhouse. Some of the games against Buffalo were just memorable in the Mill League. If you go, again, like we talked off air, if you go onto the All Lacrosse YouTube page, you'll see a number of those games with Marty O'Neill in net, and some of the crazy stuff that went on with the Kilgores and all the other things on the ESPN broadcasts.
Yeah. Well, it was an interesting team. I mean, back then the league was owned by just a couple guys, and so we were kind of like a satellite team. And so we were limited to how many Canadians we could have on our roster. So we had Marty O'Neill and Rodney Tapp were two of the guys that kind of came back from year to year. And then we had a third kind of offensive spot that Ted Dowling was our lefty sniper for a while. Darren Fridge came from out west one year. And then outside of that, it was just American field players that had learned the game. And we were competitive. But when we went up against some of the teams, like the Wings that had the Gate brothers and a few more Canadians and Buffalo that was just stacked, it was hard for us to compete when it really came down to the playoffs. It was hard for us to kind of take that next step against those teams.
Right. Darius Kilgore always brought up the fact that this was like the Wild West of lacrosse. Stuff that we watched, if we were to see it now, would probably be a 5-game suspension, whereas back then it might be change of possession.
Well, when it first started, yeah, there was like a no man's land in front of the cage where literally anything could happen. Luckily, like when I started in '95, it had cleaned that up a little bit. So it was probably a lot more similar than today. I mean, I would say even that those first couple of years, I don't believe fighting was part of the game. I think there were some historic fights that you're referring to of bench clearing brawls with the Bandits and the Blazers, but there wasn't a lot of fighting. It wasn't until we went to the NLL where they made some changes and kind of brought fighting back into the game.
Right. Now you played for some really great coaches as well. You played for Ron Fraser in Boston. You were over in the Baltimore for a couple of years. Played for John Tucker. That was an interesting one too, because with Baltimore, they were really a last place club and put together a really good club once you got there with some of your suggestions as well. And of course, they're able to get Gary Gate as well. And all of a sudden, you guys are vying for a title.
Yeah. So what was it? The fall of '97, our Players Association forced the league to go to private ownership. And so somebody bought the Boston Blazers franchise. I think it was the owner of the Providence Bruins. And we had a training camp plan, but we had kind of forced the league to private ownership, but we didn't have a collective bargaining agreement. And so our reps encouraged us not to go to training camp until we had a deal in place. And so we canceled training camp at the last minute, and it spooked the owner, and he ended up backing out. And so the Boston Blazers went into a disbursement draft, and I think there was only a couple of us that really ended up playing after that. Most of the Blazers retired at that point. Randy Frazier went to Buffalo. Tom Carmine might have played somewhere, and I got picked up by Baltimore. I mean, at that point, I knew just one person in Baltimore, but that was a priority in my life to continue playing. So I quit my job coaching at Mount Ida College and packed up my car and moved to Baltimore.
Right.
When we got there, it was kind of late in training camp. So it was in December. It was right before we got Gary Gate, and I showed up, and it was a lot of field players, as you referenced, like they were the worst placed team in the league the year before. And I'm kind of thinking to myself, what have I gotten myself into? But we were able to add a couple of players. Chris Panos was a guy who played for me in Boston. He wasn't doing anything, so they signed him up. We got Gary Gate, and the team went from worst to playing in the President's Cup that year. So that was quite a transformation. As I referenced earlier, Gary Gate was one of my idols kind of when I was in high school. And so to play alongside him was really a cool experience. To be in Baltimore, really a hotbed of collegiate lacrosse, was just an amazing experience for a guy like myself that was, obsessed with lacrosse. To have so many great college programs in that area, and even like lacrosse bars to go to. It was a great place to be at that point in my life.
Right. Now you wind up in Philadelphia. You ask for a trade, and they give it to you. Let's talk about that. And coming into the Wings in their heyday, really, because you had the spectrum that was full. You had the team that was on the verge, and actually you won a championship with them in 2001, and we'll get into that in a few minutes. Playing for Tony Resch, that man, his lineage is this long. Let's talk about a few things of that. And, first of all, going there and your first impressions of the Philadelphia fan base and all that.
Yeah. Well, I had developed an appreciation for not only the fan base, but members of the Philadelphia Wings, and playing against them. I'd met some amazing people that just were, beyond friendly to me. Even the fans, like, when I first started playing there, they harassed me pretty good, but they would always come up and say hi after. And so, in Baltimore, it was a good experience at first, but it wasn't the best fit for me exactly. And so I asked to be traded, and they did me a favor, traded me. I don't know, can't remember exactly what they got for it. It wasn't much, but I was accepted right away in Philadelphia. The fans definitely appreciated my style of play. And Tony Resch, is just a legend. I mean, he's the best coach I've ever had. He obviously wins at every single level. You don't ever want to bet against Tony Resch, and he just has an amazing combination of, he has a great ability to analyze a situation, put together a game plan that's, able, for people to understand and fairly easy to put into play. And then he just kind of instills a confidence in both, the game plan and the team. I mean, that I really joined the Wings at kind of the tail end of their heyday. In the Major Indoor Lacrosse League days, I mean, the owners stacked the Wings and the Bandits. That's just the reality of it, because those were the venues, the cities that supported the teams. Those were the two best teams. And so when it went to private ownership, and there was, some kind of moving around or more fair play as far as putting together teams, I think that took away, in some respects, some of the advantages that Philadelphia had. And so it took a couple of years to get back to that Champions Cup. 2001 was the year that I was a part of that. We played the Rock. They'd won two championships prior. We were a big underdog, and really that allowed us to have that advantage of kind of sneaking in under the radar a little bit.
Right. When I had Dallas Elliott on the show, also Mark Millen for that matter, they both had mentioned, Toronto basically had the parade route mapped out already, and you listen to the news, and you guys sitting in the hotel going, yeah, let's just find a way to spoil this all, because this is ridiculous. And you had guys like Mark Millen have the career games. Dallas Elliott having just a fantastic game. The score looked close, but really it wasn't. Philadelphia was dominant that day to win the championship, and shutting up, me included, 17,000 fans in the Air Canada Centre. It was a pretty astounding event, because the other two that Toronto won before that, Warren says, for foregone conclusions. This one, everybody already had, why even bother with the game? And you guys came up huge. Every one of you played absolutely, whatever needed to be done was done in that game.
Well, we hadn't even come close to beating the Rock in a number of years, and so they had every reason to be confident going into that game. But I think we had a good game plan. It was one of those. There's a few times in my life where I've gone into a game against a team that's probably better, but you just have this feeling you're going to win, and it was a surreal experience going into that game. And we jumped out on them because they didn't really expect much from us. We were able to jump out on them pretty big. And as you referenced, I mean, Dallas Elliott, it was one of his great all-time games. Jake Berge is somebody that stands out that was just dialed in. Tom Marechek had some beautiful goals. And you referenced Mark Millen, and it was an inspired performance by us. And I do really give a lot of that credit to Tony Resch.
Right. Now, just for people to reference, you looked a little different back then when you were playing. We happen to have a little photo, and my question to you is helmets. There's no way that you can get one just off the rack and go, yeah, that's it, and away we go. There had to be a whole lot of maneuvering to get that to work for you.
Well, not every helmet fit, and so once I got one that I guess from year to year, some are a little bit bigger than others, and so when I got one that fit, I kind of stuck with it for a couple of years. There was just a Bauer one that fit, and so I stuck with it. But yeah, they didn't make helmets back then to accommodate thick dreads.
Right. Now, they nicknamed you Dude, and most people would think that's just the way it is, but the story behind that, I think, was still.
Yeah. So the story behind it, when I started playing against the Wings and against the Rochester Nighthawks, they would play music when I touched the ball. Or in Rochester, one year it got so bad that the PA announcer was literally heckling me during the play. They since changed the rules so you can't say anything derogatory or insightful over the PA address, but they didn't have those rules back then. So in Philadelphia, they played "Dude Looks Like a Lady," kind of like the "Dana, Dana, dude looks like a lady" whenever I touched the ball. And so when I got to Philadelphia, the fans shortened it just to "Dude."
Right. Now, 2003, you call it quits due to some more concussion problems. How severe was it that it cost you your career?
Well, it was severe enough that I had kind of lingering effects for a couple of years even. I had the one, I guess I started out in preseason. We went out to Colorado in Colorado's first ever preseason game. We get off the flight and our bus got delayed getting there. So we showed up at the rink. It was like a preseason scrimmage they had after an Avalanche game. And so they had like 8 or 10,000 fans from the Avalanche game that had stuck around. And so we showed up and they're like, you guys are playing in 30 minutes. So it was a little bit of a rush job.
Mm-hmm.
At one point in that game, I got hit from behind, went headfirst into the boards and just had a minor concussion. But later in the season, we were playing Rochester and I got blindsided. It was a legal hit, but blindsided by Reggie Thorpe. And that knocked me out of the game. I came back and played the following week. And then I think the following week after that, I didn't have any memorable hits, but a pupil flared up and had some post-concussion symptoms.
Right.
And so, I dealt with that for a couple of years, really. And would, once I was feeling better, I'd like bump my head just doing yard work or something like that. And it would kind of bring symptoms back. So, it was fairly significant, that I dealt with it for a couple of years.
Right. Because the other one that comes to mind is Casey Zaff and his problems with concussions. I had him on the show also, and he almost died due to his concussion problems. And he's become a real champion of brain injuries and things like that, at least up here in Canada. So, I can feel for that one as well.
Yeah. I mean, it was a different time. I mean, I can't remember too many practices I ever missed, even after a concussion. It just was a different time, obviously. And we just treat those a lot more seriously now and give players time to recover. And there's actually even some things that they can do, some physical therapy things that they can do. But back then, there wasn't much that anyone really knew about them. And, when you had a coach, most of us were tough guys. And so if you could go out and play, you'd go out and play. I mean, Casey Zaff is really an extreme situation where that just went horribly, horribly bad. And so, for me, like, it was unfortunate, but, I've been able to make a full recovery and so I feel good about that.
Right, definitely. Now you transform into coaching. You were coaching along the way anyways, but now this became your focus. Let's talk about, you're out of the game playing and now you're moving and how are you going about this to make this your full-time gig?
Yeah, well, while I was playing, I worked for Gate Lacrosse for 10 years as a sales and promotion rep. But even when I moved to Baltimore, I coached Division I women's lacrosse at Loyola and Towson for 6 years. Then I got back into coaching, professional box for the Blazers and the U.S. indoor team at 2 world championships. My experience in Boston, I really enjoyed it, the NLL, but the reality is it's not quite as secure of a job as a lot of the college positions. And so, I've been here at St. Lawrence in the town I grew up in for going on 12 years now. And so it's just really nice to be able to work with student athletes on a daily basis. You really are, asked to, or, called to mentor them even more so probably than a lot of the professional players. St. Lawrence is a school with 35 varsity sports and really put us in a position to be successful. And so it's a great place to come, spend your days being involved with what you love most.
Absolutely. Let's talk a little bit more about in Boston. I know it's not a secure thing, but you put together quite a team. Unfortunately, the rent agreements and the other things and other, outside of lacrosse is what caused Boston to franchise there. But the team that was on the floor was a spectacular team between Cosmo and Net, the Dawsons, a few others. And really, they really had a chance to do something big. And talk about your time with them just as putting that together and coaching.
Yeah. So I might have been the first employee that they hired, and I think it was probably going back to 2007. I was hired as the head coach and general manager. We were planning on starting in 2008. We had an expansion draft and put together a team. So in that fall of I'm trying to think if it was 2007 or 2008. There was a collective bargaining discussion, and basically the league suspended operations and canceled the season. It was a day or two after we moved into an office space and had a merger agreement with the Boston Cannons. And so, ultimately it was a bit of a power play by the league to try to force the players' hand. But our owner got spooked, as rightfully so, and basically pulled us out of that agreement and shut it down for a year and said, let's start, give ourselves a full year. And so, at that time that was tough to take because I was excited. But the reality is, like, to give us that extra full year to prepare, we were able to put together a team that made the playoffs in our very first year. Granted, we got lucky with some disbursement drafts. We picked up Dan Dawson and Cosmo, which, you couldn't find two better people to anchor a new team. But we're able to really be thoughtful of who we wanted to bring in. And we prioritized younger guys that were able to relocate, had looked at some other expansion teams and what they had done that had been successful and what had teams that had failed. I mean, you'd seen some teams that had a great first year bringing in veteran players, but as those players aged, they kind of got worse as years went on. My thought was that, an expansion city will give you the benefit of the doubt for a year or two, but after that, they want your team to be competitive. And so we erred on the side of bringing in younger players with the thought of, we want to get better in year 2 and 3 and not just, blow it all in year 1.
Right. Well, kudos to some of your drafting because, some of these guys are still in the league today. Nick Rose comes to mind. Paul Dawson, who's playing for a championship in a couple of weeks again. Just absolutely amazing. And you had these guys when they were a lot younger and were able to mold some of your ideas into them as well.
Yeah, well, having the Dawson brothers was a great kind of anchor point. We were playing at the Boston Garden and we rented a house. They called it the Canadian Embassy because we packed in 12 or 13 young Canadians into that place, maybe an American as well. But they live right in the north end, a block and a half from the Garden. So that was just an amazing experience. Obviously, that led to team building. Dan Dawson lived in Boston that first year, and he was just an amazing mentor for the younger guys. He had proven himself as like the clutch player the previous few years in the playoffs, averaging about 5 goals a game in every playoff game that he had played. And so he was really an amazing kind of cornerstone of those early teams.
Right. How important, Tom, how helpful was it or is it that lacrosse is played all year round and doing just that, putting a team together? Because you get at face value, I would say you get more of an opportunity to see how players play together with different players. Is that help when you're in that situation? Well,
having a year to put that team together, I mean, both myself and Randy Frazier, we went on a tour. We went to see an NLL game almost every weekend. In the summer, I went out to BC a couple of times. I lived in Ontario for a month or so. And so we were able to get kind of a report on a lot of different players, and we're able to kind of cherry pick guys that we really liked, and we're a lot more mindful. If we would have played in that first year, we would have had a lot different results than we did having that extra year and having, obviously Dan Dawson and Cosmo to anchor that team.
Yeah.
Right. You also coached U.S. indoor lacrosse teams as well in 2007 and 2011. Let's talk about those things, because from there and where the program is now is quite a big movement upward.
Yeah. So I think 2007, that might have been the second World Championships they had. And so a big part of putting that team together was convincing the best players in the U.S. to be a part of it. There's just so many different teams and leagues. You would think that an opportunity to play for USA, everyone would jump at that opportunity. But, people have families, and not to mention playing for other professional teams during that time. And so a big part of it was really, selling guys that we could put together a competitive team. And, you talk about some of the veterans on that team. I mean, Reggie Thorpe is one guy that stands out. He is just a tremendous leader, and as kind of a player captain, he brought with him some players from Rochester, and I think that was a really stepping stone year for the U.S. team. And then the following year, in 2011, we really did get the best players in the U.S. Casey Powell was on that team. Drew Westervelt was on that team. I mean, the big challenge for the U.S. teams have been able to find a goalie that is that elite level goalie. Obviously, if you have a goalie who's a top 1 or 2 or 3 players in the world, typically there's a significant drop off even after that top group of 3 goalies. So that has been the biggest challenge in those international competitions.
Right. Well, you had to experience it anyways, because you played on the 2002 Heritage Cup where the U.S. beat Canada, and that's the aha moment for the U.S. because Canada always talks about the '78 Miracle on Manchester where they beat the U.S. field, and I think this was the one that was the get even one in box.
Well, that was an interesting one. I mean, it was a team that was put together for that one game, and so somewhat of an all-star team on both sides. Tony Resch was the coach of that U.S. team, and once again, I give him all the credit for pulling that upset off. And we had a team that had some firepower on it, but it also had some role players. And I think if you look at the Canadian team, it had a lot of the best players in the world, without question, but maybe not the role players that we had. And once again, they probably underestimated us, and that's always an important part of an upset is having a team that doesn't respect you as much as maybe as they should.
Sure. Now you're with the St. Lawrence Saints women's program. Now you predominantly were coaching the men's programs. How did you get involved with the women?
So yeah, for the last 11 years, I've been the head men's assistant here at St. Lawrence University. I also have helped the women's program. As I mentioned, when I was in Baltimore, I coached Division I women's lacrosse at Loyola and Towson, so I have a background in it. Basically the coach left this summer, and the school had a hard time finding a replacement. And it's a team that I've had close interactions with the past few years, and just couldn't let it go to just anybody, and felt like it was the right time and place for me to step up into this opportunity. Just finished our first season, losing to RIT in overtime in the Liberty League playoffs. And so it was a great first year. I mean, our players showed up every single day, worked hard, stayed positive through some tough moments. Ultimately, at the end of the day, that's a huge part of, I'd say, making something worthwhile is when people care enough and put that sort of commitment and dedication to it. And so, it was a significant shift for me to make that commitment to the women's team. And now, my days revolve around putting together a team that can compete against some of the top teams in our league.
Right.
What was the interesting thing about taking over for women? Because the learning curve with women, it's a little steeper curve now, but being right there up front, what are some of the misconceptions maybe I would have about women's lacrosse?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, my first introduction to girls and women's lacrosse was when I moved to Baltimore, and somebody asked me if I would coach the St. Paul's School for Girls assistant coach. And at that point, Gary Gate was the head women's assistant at Maryland. They won 10 national championships in a row. And so, one day in the locker room, I asked Gary, I'm like, they're asking me to coach women, what's some advice you have for me? And so, I mean, his advice was, the reality is that the skills are the same. The games have been kind of separate and have been taught differently, but the reality is that it doesn't have to be that way. And so the men's and women's games have gotten a lot more similar over the last, this is 25 years ago. Gary Gate was the head coach of the women's program at Syracuse. The assistant coach was Reggie Thorpe. They admitted that they taught box lacrosse to their women's team. And so the games have gotten very similar. I'd say at the Division I level, it's an amazingly fast and skilled and physical game. I'd say at the Division III level, it really depends on the referees of how much you can get away with. And so at the highest level, it's just a fantastic game filled with athleticism, skill, and physicality.
So basically, that old adage comes in: why reinvent the wheel?
Well, there's questions, because they don't wear equipment, there's rules in place that, for safety purposes, and there's not a lot of way around that. It would be better if shooting space wasn't a rule and you could just play like you would and not have to worry about, hitting players with balls and sticks. But that's not where we're at right now. And as I said, at the elite levels, the games are very similar. Even to box lacrosse. The two-man game is a big part of a lot of offenses. A lot of the skills are the same. Shooting and scoring is very similar as well.
We've had different answers to the same question. What's the status of women's equipment? We'll get two different answers. On this show, we've had two different answers. Well, there's plenty. And then we've had other answers like there could be more.
Yeah, this being my first year, my role is really, or my job's been to just understand the rules better. And the reality is, it is a very subjective game. The rules are very subjective, and so from game to game, depending on the referees, you could have a completely different game. And so that's been the hardest part for me. Working with the team has been amazing. As I said, they've showed up every day and worked hard with great attitude and love one another. And so, at the end of the day, that's what's most important. Dealing with referees and the rules, that can be challenging, and as it is at any level. But when referees can play such a significant role, that's the challenging part.
Well, I'm sure they're all grateful that you're involved. It's great to have people with the kind of experience that you have in lacrosse, crossing that line or going over that bridge.
Well, I think they appreciate the passion that I have for the sport. And in return, as I said, they showed up every day and worked hard. We talked to them about, you're not always going to be at your best. Sometimes you have life or school that comes into play, but to just let that go and bring your best every day, whatever that best is. Ultimately, I look back and feel like our season was a success because people showed up and did their best. Out of 100 and however many practices, we had one or two bad practices. And so to me, that really was an indication of just how much they cared about it and, how hard they were trying.
Gary?
Have they come towards you to maybe start working with them as well? Because the U.S. women, absolutely, them and the Canadian women stole the show at the World Championships back last September.
No, the reality is, I'm pretty good if I can focus on one thing, but I try to be careful about signing up for too many things. The head coach of the U.S. women's program was Ginny Cappuccioni. She was one of our goalies in the 2011 World Championship on the men's team. And so I don't know if you know her background, but she was a backup goalie for the was it New Jersey Storm in the NLL, and as I said, was on our U.S. team. And so I give her a lot of credit. That was amazing to see that the World Championships held for the women. We have a member of the Haudenosaunee national team coming here next year. Talis Tarbell will be a first-year student here at St. Lawrence. We're really excited to see her. and really looking for opportunities to bring more box lacrosse to not only the women's game, but to St. Lawrence University specifically.
Right. I just got back from Prague from the Rubeski tournament, and of course, She-Box was going on there as well. And like everything in Europe, it's kind of like hockey. If we're not careful in North America, just the way hockey surpassed in Europe, lacrosse can do it too. Because every year I go there, it's in big steps. It's gotten so much better that it's a great thing for the game. But North America better not sit on their laurels.
Yeah, in 2011, the games were over in Prague, and we played the Czech Republic in the bronze medal game, and they had Jim Veltman as one of their coaches. And so the team was comprised of all people from the Czech Republic. A lot of those teams will bring in Americans or North Americans, Canadians to play on their international teams. But the Prague or the Czech team was all natives, and they are very good at box lacrosse, as I'm sure you can attest to.
Absolutely, every year they're there into the semis or the finals. So it's incredible, and watching them year after year after year, and new players after new players, and watching all the developmental and the kids. It's incredible to see so many in there. So it's in good hands out there, I think. Let's talk a little bit about State of the Union for NLL. Do you think that they're missing the boat on? I always come up with the All-Star game myself. When you were playing, they had the All-Star game, and now especially with ESPN, with TSN in Canada, and having these platforms to showcase the greatest players in the world. Do you think that they're maybe missing the boat on this by not having an All-Star game?
It's a good question. I don't think I'm the best person to answer that. I mean, I know All-Star games in the past, I mean, they can be entertaining, but it's not the best game necessarily. And so as you're referring to it, other leagues have made a weekend or an event out of it.
The PLL comes to mind, really.
Yeah.
Yeah. The idea that we had was maybe just to make it a little bit more interesting and put a little more on the line is that this year's champion is the host of next year's All-Star game against the All-Stars in the league. They're not going to want to lose to the All-Stars, and the All-Stars are going to want to knock off the champions. So there might be a little bit more into that game than if it were just, a bunch of guys coming out for a Sunday afternoon.
Yeah.
But full time, you think that's on the horizon?
Well, I've been impressed and surprised at just the expansion in the NLL. I know how hard it was for us to get close to break even in Boston. Now, granted, we were renting office space across the street from the Garden and had to pay a significant fee to play at the Garden. So I think the model is really like people that own the building or own hockey teams can kind of piggyback that. That's really seems to be the winning formula.
Okay.
I think you're able to get the top players in the world when you are kind of a part-time league and allow guys other jobs. Think of, how long would a Dan Dawson have been able to play if he couldn't have been a firefighter on the side. And so, one of the things that I always thought was great about lacrosse is that it not only allowed you, but forced you to have another job. And so that at 32 or whatever your age is, when you retire from lacrosse, you're not starting from square one. And I feel like a lot of other like minor leagues where people get a full-time salary and play their sport exclusively until they're in their 30s and then have to start a career at that point can be a little bit more challenging than if you had a career and you were working on that along the way.
Right. You also make a good point in that, but also the scholarships. You get a chance to have an Ivy League school and get a degree playing lacrosse and come out with a business degree or whatever degree you're going to go in to make you ready for after lacrosse things as well. Whereas
a lot of those guys from the top schools, they want to get right into it and get the jobs on Wall Street, and a lot of places will allow them some flexibility to play in a professional league, if they're only missing, a day here or there and playing on weekends.
Right. What's your thoughts on sixes, since it's going to be in the Olympics in a couple of years' time, where it's just the big push for the grand stage?
To be honest, I think it's a poor man's box lacrosse. And so not a huge fan of it. I mean, it would be fun to play. It looks like a pickup game. but it seems like you've got teams that are trying to play box lacrosse on the field. And, I understand that was necessary in order to get it at the Olympic level, but I'm not really a fan personally.
Right. Do you think it gives it an opportunity for some of the nations that maybe wouldn't have an opportunity or a chance to play against Canada, U.S.? You're going to have players to do it.
For teams to be able to put together a roster of 12 or 14 or 15 or whatever it is to play, 100%. That's why they did it. It's not personally a version that I'm that excited about.
Right. I read something about, back when you had a mustache, a big mustache, that you put it on the line to support Headstrong. Can you tell us a little bit about that organization and that fundraising?
Well, Headstrong is an amazing organization. I mean, they own a couple houses, and if you have someone in your family that's going through like chemotherapy or cancer treatments and can't afford, a lot of times, you have to relocate to a city. They have some houses where you can stay while your family member is getting cancer treatments. And so it's an amazing program. I mean, my dad died of cancer when I was 18, and so have a kind of a soft spot for those sort of cancer foundations. But what the Clarys have done to put that together and is remarkable.
Right. Just one or two more before we let you go. Any thoughts about coming back to the NLL now in this new invigorated form?
Well, I have not thought seriously about it. I mean, whenever the job opens up at Philadelphia, I think for about 5 seconds about it. I mean, I really enjoyed doing that, but the reality is my quality of life here at St. Lawrence is tough to beat. And I just it's tough to pass that up. I live a quarter mile from campus. Canton is in upstate New York, kind of on the edge of a college town, and so we live just a quarter mile away from campus, but are already in the country and live on a river, and so it's tough to really pass up that quality of life.
Sure. And now that you're in the off season, what's keeping you busy?
Well, we finished up last Tuesday. Monday I drove down to New Jersey to watch high school game. Monday, one Tuesday, drove to Andover, New Hampshire yesterday, watched the game there, then drove home last night. And so, recruiting is a huge part of the off season. I mean, now until end of July is really the premier time for seeing high school players play, and then the fall is another real valuable time. End of October, November, those 2 times of the year is when you get to see most of the high school players play.
Right. I really want to thank you for taking the time. I know you're still busy with everything and keeping everything going, and just for being able to sit and walk through memory lane with us a little bit and talking about the future as well.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really enjoyed my time.
Really is a pleasure to have you here. As far as I'm concerned, it's great to have. The biggest and most important thing about lacrosse is it's almost a life. It's a life experience. That you're one of the people that has expressed that by your conversation here, and we appreciate your contribution to lacrosse.
Thank you.
All right, Gary, fun show today. We'll see you again next week. And of course, our guest, Tom Ryan, former NLL player. We thank you all for watching. Follow us on Twitter and, of course, All Lacrosse all the time. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you next time.